our first case law is on the Abu Dhabi Authority, Investment Authority versus, and this case is coming from the AR Bombay here. This is a writ petition which has been filed in the Bombay High Court against the order of the Authority of the Advanced Ruling. There are common ruling in this case. They are passed in the common ruling. The common ruling is in Re 431 ITR 379. That was decided from the AR. There are two writ petitions which has been filed here. One is the writ petition number 770 and one is the 709. Abu Dhabi Investment Authority has filed one writ petition, and the trust, in fact, the trustee, that is the Equity Trust Jersey Limited, it has filed another writ petition before the Bombay High Court here. And what is the law involved in this case? Law involved is section 60, 61, 63, 160, and India UAE DTA, and how to understand the Trust Act here. Fact of the case is that Abu Dhabi Investment Authority is a public institution under the UAE and covered under the section 4.2 of the India UAE DTA as a resident of UAE. Very much important, sir. Under the India UAE treaty, Abu Dhabi Investment Authority has been specifically mentioned as a resident of the contracting state. Under 4.2, they have been mentioned as in a 4.1, there is a paragraph D, and through the paragraph D, they have been mentioned that Abu Dhabi Investment Authority is a resident of UAE. It does not have the business connection or P in India, which is a given fact here, and also covered under Article 24 of the DTA. Article 24 talks about the income of the government, and it says that the income of the governments of any of the contracting states shall be exempt from tax, that will not be covered to the taxation. And Abu Dhabi Investment Authority is one of the organizations which has been especially covered under Article 24 of the DTA. It is also registered as a financial institutions, foreign institutional investor, and the foreign portfolio investor with the SEBI. Yes, let's see, sir, how the things has materialized here. Now, ADIA has settled a trust in Jersey. Very much important thing. The trust has been set up in Jersey. There's a settlement deed for this purpose, and the settlement deed dated 22nd of July 2013 states that this trust is a revocable trust and a determinative trust, as the settler itself was the sole beneficiary. The important point is that we will discuss also with whether the trust can be a sole beneficiary or the trust can also be trustee. And for this purpose, we will go through the Trust Act also to understand whether the trust can be the beneficiary or not. As per the Trust Act, although the Indian Trust Act is no more applicable on this issue, but Trust Act says that the settler can also be the beneficiary. ADIA using Jersey for the other overseas worldwide investment. So it is their investment network here. Through this investment network, ADIA uses the Jersey as an overseas worldwide investment investment route. And Jersey is not a obstructed or opaque nation. There is exchange of information with India. They have the EOI signed with India also. So therefore, it is not an obstructed or opaque nation like any other, other tax haven, but it is a exchange of information that has already signed with the India here. What was the question before the Authority of Advanced Ruling? Question was whether the corpus contribution by the ADIA to the trust is a revocable transfer under section 63 of the Income Tax Act or not. So the first question which was there with the AR, the corpus, the settlement of the trust by the ADIA and contribution of the corpus by the ADIA is a revocable transfer under section 63 of the Act or not. If the above is affirmative, whether the income from out of whether the income from India out of such investment by the trust will be chargeable to ADIA under section 61. So the second issue was there, if it is a revocable trust, then who should be chargeable to tax? Whether the ADIA will be chargeable to tax under section 61. If both the above is affirmative, then whether the income of the ADIA is covered under Article 24 of the DTA. We know that under this Article 24, the tax, the income of the government is exempted, and ADIA was especially covered as an exempted entity, and therefore the question was raised whether the ADIA will be entitled to get the benefit of the Article 24 of the DTA or not. If all the above is affirmative, the TDS rate was asked that what will be the TDS raised in this case. What was the AR conclusion? After a lot of argument, the AR concluded that income accrued to the trust and therefore taxable. It says that, AR says that the trust is a different entity. The trust is settled in Jersey and the income has accrued to the trust and therefore it is a taxable in India. There is no DTA between India and Jersey, and so therefore it will be taxable also. India UAE DT does not applicable either on the trustee or the trust. So since the trustee is in the Jersey, the trust is also in Jersey here. So therefore, the India UAE DT will not apply to this trust here, or to this trustee here. India not ratified the Hague Trust Convention, and therefore the trust law of the foreign jurisdiction not applicable to India. It is another dimension of discussing that what is the Hague Trust Convention and what about whether the India is not a signatory of this Hague Trust Convention, and therefore the question was whether raised, since the India has not signed the Hague Trust Convention, whether the trust law of the Jersey will apply to India or not. Now, another part was also there, how the AR has reached to the issues here. AR conclusion was that the settler cannot be the sole beneficiary. One of the contention was that the settler, which was the ADIA, cannot be the sole beneficiary. If a settler is a sole beneficiary, then what will happen to the trust? Whether the trust will be a revocable trust or whether the trust will exist here. Second part was that section 61 cannot be applied, otherwise it will be avoidance of tax and liable to be rejected at the threshold of the 245R. We know that if there is any iota of the avoidance of tax, then the AR has the option not to entertain that application and reject this application at the threshold itself here. So the AR says that if there is a avoidance of tax, then it is liable to be rejected at the threshold. Trust not covered under the Indian Trust Act and therefore not covered under section 160. One of the important ground through which the AR has rejected the application of the ADIA, saying that the trust is not covered under the Indian Trust Act and therefore not covered under the section 160 of the income tax also. Income has accrued to trust and not trustee, and it cannot be trust in the like manner in the same extent. One of the argument was that the trust is not a legal entity. The trust has to be taxed, and for this, the trust has to be taxed in the hands of the trustee. And when the trustee is taxed, it has to be taxed in the like manner and the same extent. We will also discuss the applicability of the section 160, subsection 1, subclause 4 also in this regard here. AR rejected the ADIA argument that even if the trust is ignored, ADIA income is not taxable under Article 24. ADIJ denied to lift the corporate will, saying that the lifting of the will is not warranted. Accrual of the income to the trust and not the ADIA, and therefore trust is not covered under the Article 24, and therefore the benefit of the Article 24 will not be given in this case here. And after that, one of the conclusion of the AR was that the section 115 AD is applicable to the trust because it was the foreign institutional investor and the FPI. Now, when the matter traveled to the High Court, the argument has started like this one. SSC argument is like this one. SSC has started his argument with the section 63B. Very much interesting point that why he started the argument with the section 63B. Section 63B is the definition for the purpose of section 61, 60, 61, 62. For this purpose, the section 63 has two definitions, and there is a term transfer. The transfer definition, which is covered under the term section 63B, transfer includes settlement, trust. Therefore, it is an inclusive definition. The first argument is that the transfer for the purpose of section 63 is an inclusive definition, and it includes what it includes. It includes any settlement, trust, covenant, agreement, or arrangement. So it includes all this. It is a very inclusive definition, not a watertight compartment. It can subsume many more things. That issue is that it should be a transfer. And after that, it also says that as per the deed of settlement, which was very much interesting point in this case, the SSC argues that the transfer is a revocable transfer. If it is a revocable transfer, it is not disputed that it's covered in the revocable transfer, and trust is covered under the 63A also. The 63A talks about, 63 says that for the purpose of section 60, 61, 62 and this section, the transfer shall be deemed to be revocable if, first condition is that, when the transfer will be revocable, if it contains any provision for the retransfer directly or indirectly of the whole or any part of the income or assets to the transfer. So if the agreement itself contains any arrangement through which the income itself will flow back to the transferor, then we can say that it is a revocable transfer here. And second part is that, or in any ways gives the transfer a right to reassume the power or indirectly over the whole or any part of the income or assets, then it can again be called as a revocable transfer. So based on the fact, the starting point is that the council has started the argument on the section 63B and says that this transfer is a settlement, it is a settlement or it is a trust, and this transfer is a revocable transfer, and therefore the transfer of the corpus to the trust under revocable transfer is for the sole benefit of the ADIA, which is again, we have to understand the private trust. As we know that there is a public trust and the private trust, and in the private trust there are three elements which is important: settlor, trustee, beneficiary, and the property. There is no law which bars that the settlor cannot be a beneficiary. But here the issue is that the settlor is the sole beneficiary here. The point with that arises here, if the settlor is the sole beneficiary here, can we say that it is itself a revocable trust? And when it is a revocable trust itself, it is a revocable trust, then it is covered under section 61. Another part is that it says that trustee is obliged to distribute the income. When the trustee is obliged to distribute the income, this means it is a non-discretionary trust. It is not a discretionary trust, but it is a non-discretionary trust where the trustee does not have the discretion to hold any income, to hold any part of the income, or therefore it says that the trustee is obliged to distribute the income to the trust so arise from the fund investment to ADIA to the beneficiary itself, and there is no discretion of the trust. Therefore, this trust is a non-discretionary trust. After that, it says that since the trust is a non-discretionary trust, that beneficiary is determinative. It is a determinative trust, and therefore we can apply the section 61. After that, the council argues that going to the settlement deed, ADIA has a right to terminate or dissolve the trust. And in such event, ADIA has to receive all the proceeds of the dissolution. It is very much important part that the settler has the right to terminate or dissolve the trust. And the second part is that on such termination, the proceeds will flow back to the ADIA itself. ADIA can reassume the power on the entire income arising on such income to the trust. Retransfer of the rights and reassumption of the power in the settlement deed that they have argued. SSC argument is that section 61 is squarely applicable. So if the section 61 is applicable, then it will be taxable in the hands of the transferor. What is the section 61 says? All income arising to any person by virtue of revocable transfer, if we are able to prove that it is a revocable transfer of the asset, shall be chargeable to income tax as the income of the transferor and shall be included in his total income. So by this way itself, that only the ADIA will be chargeable to tax, because it was through a revocable transfer. The trust was created through a revocable transfer, and therefore section 61 should be applicable. Another argument, alternative argument, was that if the trust is a determinative trust, it can be assessed under section 160 as a representative assessee, and the liability can be determined under section 161, like manner and to the same extent as beneficiary. Very much important terms. What is the term like manner and to the same extent as the beneficiary? If the trustee has to be assessed on behalf of for the income of the beneficiary, then as per section 161, the trustee has to be assessed in the like manner and in the same extent as the beneficiary. And since the beneficiary was, therefore the ADIA, therefore the color of the ADIA income and the article 24 applies. So based on this income, there is an argument that the article 24 should apply here. And another part, this is the second argument, this is the third argument is said. He says that revenue has the option to apply section 166. Section 166 is an important section under this chapter. The 166 is that gives the power to the revenue to travel beyond the trustee and reach to the beneficiary for the purpose of levy and collection of the tax. I'm just reading the 166. (166) says that direct assessment and recovery not barred. It says that nothing in the foregoing section of this chapter. So we have the chapter 15, which says the liability in the special cases. It says that nothing in the foregoing section of this chapter shall prevent either the direct assessment of the person on whose behalf or whom would benefit the income therein referred to is receivables, or the recovery from such person of the tax payable in respect of such income. So it says that there is no bar. The department or the authority, revenue authority, can travel beyond the 161 and assess directly to the beneficiary. And if it does that, and they can levy and collect the tax directly from the beneficiary. So it says that revenue has the option to apply section 166. However, either due to 161 or 166, it can tax only on the interest on the trust property. The liability of the trustee cannot be higher than that of the beneficiary. It is coming from the 161. No part of the corpus fund will be taxable. Another important part is that section 60 to 63, 160 and 161 and 163 and 166 applies to foreign trust also, not confined to the trust registered in India. This argument is a very valid argument because we should understand this part. There are two types of trust under the Indian law. One is the public trust and another is a private trust. Public trust are generally the charitable or religious trust, which are governed by the Charitable and Religious Trust Act and other act also. Whereas the Private Trust Act is governed by the Indian Trust Act 1882. It is a very old act and it is governed by the Private Trust Act. Private trust is governed by the Indian Trust Act. Department, when it was analyzing the application of the SSC before the AR, was of the view that section 62, 63 or section 160 is confined with the foreign trust, if is confined with the income, is a trust unregistered in India. So therefore, when we go to the section 63B, it says that arrangement of any kind, or it includes trust, settlement. So the department was of the view that it should be only the trust which is covered under the Indian Trust Act. But the argument is that the trust is a very wide term. This trust should not be seen from the prism of the Indian Trust Act, but this trust is a very wide term and it will include the foreign trust also. And therefore, the foreign trust will be also covered here. The case law which was relied by the SSC. First of the case was Columbia Sportswear Trust case. The Columbia Sportswear case 346 ITR was relied in order to maintainability of the writ. Why the writ is maintainable before the High Court against the order of the AR. Second judgment which was relied by the SSC was Azadi Bachao. It is the most famous judgment. Everyone knows about this one. It says that by virtue of section 90, the provision of the treaty will override the provision of the act here. Another important that is coming from the Gujarat High Court, which says that is the Bhavna Nilkanth Nanavati case here, 255 ITR 529, to support that the settler can be the sole beneficiary. Yes, this is the big part here. The settler can be the sole beneficiary. By this judgment, it is coming that it can be there. However, under the Indian Trust Act, it says that the settler can be one of the beneficiary, but it does not say that settler can be the sole beneficiary. However, from this judgment, it is coming that the settler can be the sole beneficiary also. The trust is a matter of form rather than substance. It is a form here. Trust is a pass-through entity, conduct entity only, and ownership lies with the beneficiary only here. That we can also discuss later on here. Another important judgment on which the SSC has relied is the estate of late Vikram Singh Ji of Gondal, 363 ITR 679. It is a very important case law from the Supreme Court where the issue of the discretionary trust was there. In this case, the income which was not received by the SSC under the trust, earlier they have offered this income, and after that they have went into the settlement commission for the change in their view, and Supreme Court has stated that in the case of the discretionary trust, the income will arise only when it is received by the SSC here. So in the case of the estate worker, late Vikramajit Singh Gondal, but to support that trust registered overseas, in this case the trust was also registered overseas, are covered under the tax law. So section 61, 62, 63, 160, 160 are not alien to the foreign trust. Most important part is that, and in this case, the Supreme Court has considered the foreign trust, and by considering this foreign trust, therefore the SSC is trying to take the benefit, to take the support of this case, saying that the trust law and the trust foreign trust is not alien to the Income Tax Act. These can also be understood from the different form that we file, like ITR 2, ITR 5, ITR 6, 7, invoices about the foreign trust, as it asks the detail to be furnished by the SSC. So where therefore when the department itself is asking to furnish the detail of the foreign trust for which the SSC is the beneficiary or the trustee under the various ITR form, therefore it recognizes the foreign trust in its statutes here. Another important case with the Supreme Court judgment, or very old judgment, 1977 judgment. It is about the trustee versus His Excellency Nizam family. Very famous judgment, 108 ITR. It says that assessment of the trustee is a de facto assessment of the beneficiary that is coming from the section 161 in respect of their interest in the trust property through trustee. So this says that by this judgment, and which is coming from the section 161 also, we will go through this 161 to apply this part here, saying that the assessment of the trustee is the getting the assessed on behalf of the beneficiary. So the assessment of the trustee is a de facto assessment of the beneficiary in respect of their interest in the trust property through the trustee here. What was the revenue submission? Revenue, again, it was mainly relying upon the AR order. It says that trust is taxable. There is no DTA between India and Jersey, therefore no relief under section 90. India EU DT cannot be applied. In this case, that it is important point is that revenue has not submitted any additional submission. So therefore, revenue has relied upon the order of the AR only. So trustee is say that trust is taxable. Another part is that it says that Indian Trust Act is not applicable due to section 1 of the Trust Act. Consequently, section 61, 63 and 161 or 164 is not applicable in this case. So therefore, revenue is trying to link the section 61 or section 63 with the Indian Trust Act, saying that since the Trust Act section 1 applies to the trust which is been registered in India, so therefore it should not be applied here. However, consider that there is no provision in the tax law that bars the applicability of the foreign trust to the section 60 to 63 or other provision. When the pointed question was raised by the bench to the Council of the Revenue that whether any under the Income Tax Act there is a specific bar that the trust under section 63 will not include the foreign registered trust, then the Revenue Council considered that no, there is no specific bar that the foreign trust cannot be considered under section 62, 63 here. Considered that DTA will be override, which is coming from the Azadi Bachao. Considered that trustee has no statutory bar, that there is no statutory bar to make investment through the SPV like trust. Very much important. We always seen that we have always learned that the investment through the trust is an opaque entity which has been created here. The Income Tax Act does not bar like this one, that the investment cannot be through the trust mode here. Revenue also considered that what will happen if the ADI would have invested directly, and by virtue of his direct investment, they would have covered under the Article 24 directly. So just choosing the SPV or trust is not a tax avoidance measure. So when the SSC was directly exempted from the tax due to the Article 24, so the choosing the method of the SPV or the trust should not be taken as the scene that it is for the purpose of avoidance of that tax. Now, the court reasoning, how the court has come to a reasoning in this part here. Section 61 is not dependent upon section 63, and the transfer can be revocable transfer of its own merit. Section 63 merely extend the section 61. It is one of the important finding of the High Court here, and let's see how the finding is there. When the argument was there, whether the section 61 and section 63 is linked, the court was of the view that section 3 is an independent provision, although it defines the term of the section 61 or section 62. But if we understand, if we read the section 63, it says that transfer and revocable transfer defined for the purpose of section 60, 61, 62 on this section. Transfer, there's a past transfer and there's a term transfer. Transfer includes settlement here. So the term settlement may not be specifically covered under the section 61, but it says that settlement is also a transfer. So the term transfer has a very wide meaning here. It should be not a watertight compartment, and it says that section 61 is not dependent upon section 63, and the transfer can be revocable transfer of its own merit. Section 63 merely extends the section 61. So section 61 talks about the transfer, and there can be different form of transfer. One of the form can be the settlement, trust, covenant, agreement, or any arrangement also. Any arrangement can also be transferred for the purpose of section 61. Section 63B is an inclusive definition and covers the settlement of the trust etc. If the condition of section 63A is satisfied, then the transfer, whether through the trust or not, will be covered. Very much important. It is not important that there should be a trust here. There can be any arrangement. The important point is that there should be a revocable transfer, and the transfer can be in any form, whether it's a trust or settlement. If these are the two is satisfied, then the section 63 is complied, and the moment the section 63 is complied, we can go to the section 61 also. Section 63 is not confined with the Indian Trust Act or trust governed by the Indian Trust or trust governed by the Indian Trust Act. It says that there are judgment based on the judgment. It says that section 63 is not confined with the trust or Indian Trust Act, because section 63 talks about transfer includes any settlement, trust, covenants here. So if we read in together here, justum generis, so it says that there can be settlement, trust. It does not say that trust should be trust under the Indian Trust Act, because under the Income Tax Act, wherever the legislature has wanted to say that trusts should be trust are those trusts which are covered under the Indian Trust Act, they have especially mentioned this part. I feel that section 1023B, they have discussed this part here. But here in the case of section 63, they have not discussed this part here. Section 63 is not confined to Indian Trust Act and trust governed by the Indian Trust Act here. Trust not defined under the Income Tax Act. It says that trust has not been defined, or it has not been defined under the General Clause Act. General meaning trust defined under the section 3 of the Indian Trust Act should apply. It should be a general meaning. It cannot be a watertight compartment. Foreign trust, although not settled or registered in India, is covered for the tax purpose. As we have discussed from the judgment of the Supreme Court, and by way of the ITR form, the government is recognizing the foreign trust here. So therefore it says that foreign trust is not alien to the income tax here. Ratification of the Hague Convention is not at all immaterial here, because the SSC is not trying to apply the foreign law in India, and it does not dilute the provision of section 60 to 63 like this one. Vikramasinghe case of the Supreme Court has held that foreign trusts are covered under the Indian tax law. Jersey trust provision are akin to the Indian law. Very much important point is that the Council of the SSC has compared the trust law of India and the trust law of the Jersey, saying that under section 3, mainly the trust, for what purpose the trust is created, the same is there in the Jersey also. So they have said that the Jersey trust provision are akin to the Indian law also. Another point which is the High Court is coming, neither the Income Tax Act nor the Indian Trust Act debar the settler being the beneficiary of the trust. Now, under the we have seen that under the Income Tax Act, the trust has not been defined. The trust has been defined for the purpose of private trust has been defined under the Indian Trust Act. It says that neither the Income Tax Act nor the Indian Trust Act debar the settler being the beneficiary of the trust. If you go to the section 3, it's in fact it says that the settler can be one of the beneficiary. They can settle the trust for another and for the purpose of himself, settler itself. Relied upon the Bhavna Nilankan Nanavati case to case to uphold this principle. They have upheld these principles. ADI income, that is the beneficiary income, would have exempted under Article 24 itself. Therefore, taking a trust route was not for the purpose of tax avoidance, but for the commercial expediency. The High Court says that although it was explained to the AR that why the trust route was adopted, it says that it was for the purpose of commercial expediency. Otherwise, ADI itself was allowed under Article 24 because ADI is a person resident in India as per the India-UAE Treaty, Article 4. ADIA is covered, especially covered into the Article 24. So therefore, they should be allowed here. On the alternative, so with this, the SSC has said that the court has allowed the appeal of allowed the petition of the petitioner here. Yes, now come to the alternative argument of section 160. An alternative argument is that yes, trustee can be representative SSC, and there is no bar that the foreign trust cannot become the representative SSC. The Act presupposes that foreign trust as a trust for the tax purpose. So the issue was there whether the trustee under the section 160, whether the foreign trust can be the representative SSC. The court says there is no bar that yes, the foreign trustee can also become the representative SSC here. Detail prescribed about the various IT firms support this type of view. Vikram Singh Jeet case has applied the foreign trust in section 164. Even when the 63 is not applicable, if we don't say that 63 applicable, trustee in the representative cap SSC and the income can be taxed on the trustee under section 161 in the like manner and to the extent of the beneficiary only. The benefit of the Article 24 is available. So therefore, when they are covered here, in both the way they are covered, benefit of the Article 24 is applicable either through the trust route or directly as the income belongs to the or under Article section 61 to only and not to the trust. And it says that India-UAE treaty will be applicable only. So this judgment is complete here. I have summarized this judgment here. Now we can take up the issues here.
I think Mr. Sinha has elaborated the facts, the issues, and everything. But if you see, the judgment is so peculiar, where the provisions of the Income Tax Act, which are meant for checking the tax evasion in the case of a transfer, that has been used in the favor of the SSC because the beneficiary was from Dubai, Abu Dhabi. Now, a trust has been created in a jurisdiction, in a different foreign jurisdiction, Jersey. I think we should have studied the foreign trust. The trustees are there based in Jersey. The foreign trust, where the income of the trust in the Jersey is taxable, because for Jersey it is a foreign trust. So whether that is taxable or not, because here, otherwise the income of a trust is taxable in the hands of the trust only. So perhaps that weight, the authority of advance ruling is, since it is the income earned by the trust, and therefore under section 5 and 9(1), the income has accrued in India because there was no treaty. The SSC on the contrary was that, look, I am the beneficiary, it is a revocable trust, so under revocable trust, anything and anything earned will belong to beneficiary. But trust was for a period of 8 years here, which have been revoked. The period was for 8 years. So during that, even for the 8 year, they have invoked as a being a beneficiary, the income actually belongs to me. And since income belongs to me, being revocable trust, so they invoke the provision of section 61 and 63. Since it's a revocable trust, so it amounts to a transfer. So hence, it would be chargeable and taxable in the hands of a beneficiary. So once it will be taxed in the hands of the beneficiary, being a settler, so then their question was, yes, it is taxable in the hands of a beneficiary under invoking the provision of Income Tax Act, so as to they can fall within this definite clause, article of 24, which says the government, because Abu Dhabi, this ADIA Abu Dhabi Investment Authority is the government authority because it is a part of that government. So that is why they have brought a specific Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. So it was brought into that tax. So, and of course, AR went into a very different way that foreign trust and not, so that they wanted that they should not become in the clutches of 61. Because once they are out of 61, then they can tax the trust under section 91.
Yeah.
Because admittedly, none of them had a P in India. They had an agreement with Kotak, trust had that Kotak. That agreement has not been analyzed how they would have been capitalized and what was the revenue sharing and what was the purpose. We go apart those things. The basic fundamental was that since trust has earning the income from India, the SEC said this income actually belongs to me. So it may, whatever may be the form, in substance it belongs to me and I am the resident of Abu Dhabi, hence it should be treaty benefit should be given.
Given here.
So it's a very crucial and very important where actually the taxing provision has been used for the benefit. Had it been a reverse situation, we don't know what would have been the situation. And we don't know the income because actually income has gone to the trust only. Whether it's taxability in Jersey, what is the impact? I think we have not studied that. Maybe it was not an issue involved. So those things which had come in the mind of the revenue or when they are represented revenue before the AR, perhaps that clogged the mind and they went to the extent of saying the Indian Trust Act is not applicable to the foreign trust. It is only applicable for this. So perhaps they went off track and instead of saying that income belongs to the trust and why it should come in the 911, they have gone by the fact of going into 61 and 63. And of course, the case was made out if it is a transfer because it is a revocable trust. Once it is a revocable, power of revoke has been given in the trust deed. It can be revoked at any point of time. So because of these factors, they said that ultimately all said and done, this income, because when trust is settled by a settler for a beneficiary, it is once the trust is revoked, when the trust comes to an end, then the income comes to the beneficiary. Suppose we create a beneficiary trust for minors. In India, we do everything. We create for idols, for minors, for everything. And a trust is created. Income is managed by the trustee and the manager. And once certain conditions are fulfilled, then the beneficiary gets the benefit of the trust, and accordingly, the trust gets revoked and it ends there. Under the Income Tax Act, just to peg that, since income has not accrued to the beneficiary during that time or otherwise, so they have used this even in the case of a transfer, revocable transfer, it would be subject to tax. So during that period of the trust, which was made for the beneficiary, it should not escape the assessment. So that is the reason why under 166 they said it can be taxed in the hands of the beneficiary also, it can be taxed representative also. So those are the provisions where Income Tax Act has been brought, where taxing provision under the trust created should not go, untaxed. So that was the provision brought in the statute. So now here very peculiar, 61, 63, they have been used since it is a revocable transfer. So trust, that means this trust was non-entity altogether.
That's right, sir.
In fact, it has been created a situation where there is nothing called trust here. It was just a fiduciary thing which was created in Jersey, and ultimately everything gain was for the beneficiary from day one. The capital, because they had made funds to give into the trust.
Yes, sir.
They have held their trust in there, and the trust was supposed to invest there and earn income. Ultimately, income would have gone to the beneficiary, but for the period of which the trust was there, it was for 8 years. If you read the trust deed.
Yes, sir.
So those were the points. Perhaps once it is held, it is the beneficiary which is the ultimate, and trust is just because of revocable trust. The trust entity is not that significant. So ultimately, income belongs to a resident of UAE, and therefore Article 24 will come, and this is how the things will come up. So they went to that. AR went off tangent and say Indian Trust Act doesn't apply. foreign trust doesn't apply to. This is well lost, settled law, I think long time back. There is nothing that the foreign trusts are not recognized. They are outside the purview of income tax provisions. They had been brought to tax in India. So foreign trust, Income Tax Act is applicable on that. Indian Trust Act 1882 may not be applicable to the foreign trust. But here, Income Tax Act is not confined to Indian Trust Act 1882 only.
Yes.
As you said, I think Prakash also pointed out, it is applicable to charitable, public and charitable trust also, private trust also, and of course it is applicable to foreign trust also. So once they are applicable to foreign trust, so then all those provisions come into the rescue, and this is how they have made out. I think that is why it is a very unique case which you will find.
Sir, the crucial fact in this case was there are two crucial facts. One was that trust was a revocable trust. And the second was that the trust was a non-discretionary trust because they were not allowed to hold any income. Whatever the income was there, that was flowing back to the beneficiary. So therefore, they have argued that it is a non-discretionary determinative trust. So since the non-discriminatory determinative trust, all the income is flowing back to the sole beneficiary. So therefore, the sole beneficiary should be taxable here rather than the trust here.
That is why, because now otherwise all beneficiary trusts are revocable trust only. It is only public and charitable they are made irrevocable. These are private beneficiary trusts are always revocable. Yes, there was a clause here where they said the income, whatever income is trust has to be earned. That income needs to be transferred to the beneficiary.
Yes.
So it was based on whatever income they had, so it is based on that. But we don't know what is the taxation laws in Jersey. Because of course, trust must have shown the entire income there in Jersey. So we need to explore that. What could have happened there? Anyway,
Yes, sir. Yes, and since always, like under the Income Tax Act, the trustee is tax. Although trustee can be taxed, but it is a de facto taxation of the beneficiary. Can be whether in the Jersey, if the common law country, if it is a common law country, if the same law applies there? Yes, it can be one of the view that okay, only the beneficiary will be taxable. I don't know also about the Jersey law here.
Idea whether because there what they have dealt, whether it is taxed in the hands of beneficiary or the trust, because India made trust is a taxable entity. Trust is a taxable entity in a certain conditions. How the beneficiary is taxable under what conditions? Trust is a recognized person, is a taxable entity here in India.
But sir, trust is not covered as a person under Section 231. Trust is a trust is a taxable entity in the hands of the trustee.
Trustee in the hands of the trustee.
Yeah, in the hands of the trustee, in the like manner of the beneficiary.
Yes, in certain situations it could be beneficiary also.
Yeah, it can be beneficiary here.
Beneficiary also under 166. Otherwise, it is taxable in the hands of the trustee itself, because private trust is to be taxable. The trust means in the hands of the trustee who is taking care of that trust,
yes,
which
sir.
has been paid by the settler or the beneficiary of someone.
Vertival Minerals versus ACIT. The facts of the case, sir, is that in this case, such proceeding was conducted on one group by the name of VV Group of Companies, pursuant to which assessment orders under Section 153A was framed in the case of the assessee, which was covered under search. Against the assessment order passed, the assessee, surpassing the appellate remedy, directly filed writ petitions to the Honorable High Court, mainly raising various jurisdictional issues. I have just called out the points on which the learned assessee has filed a petition. Number one, sir, no incriminating materials were seized during the time of search, and therefore no addition or disallowance can be made in assessment under Section 153A. Number two, this is very important according to me, which gives a unique picture to this case law, that the entire assessment orders of the petitioners were framed on the basis of alleged secondary evidence of electronic records such as Excel sheet, Excel notebook, Excel files, email communication, and WhatsApp conversation, sir. It was contended that since the mandatory requirement of section 65 capital B of the Indian Evidence Act has not been complied with in respect of any electronic records relied by the revenue, they are not being admissible as evidence. The assessment order being passed on the same cannot be sustained in the eyes of law. Number 3, sir, that the assessee has not given the opportunity to cross-examine the person whose statement were recorded under section 132(4) of the Act and were used for making the addition disallowance under section 153A, and non-providing opportunity of such cross-examination is in gross violation of principle of natural justice. Number 4, the assessee was handicapped from effectively defending the proposal of the addition and disallowance of the department in the absence of copies of panchnamas being given to them. In this case, sir, a number of panchnamas was not given to the assessee, which was repeatedly asked by him. In the absence of said panchnamas, the assessee is not in a position to account as to what are the seized material and from which group the said materials are seized, and whether the seized material has anything incriminating, and whether the department was deliberately not considered most of the seized material, which otherwise would prove the genuineness of the transaction. The assessee further contended that the assessment order has been passed in a very mechanical manner, and it is in fact a copy and paste of the show cause notice. The assessee in the petition itself has also justified that the mere presence of alternative remedy, which in this case was filing an appeal to CIT appeal, does not bar an assessee to invoke the jurisdiction of the Honorable High Court. So these were the main points on which the assessee has moved to the High Court in the writ jurisdiction. Now, countering the argument of the assessee, the revenue said that as this was expected, in view of the alternative remedy available under the statute, the writ petitions are not maintainable. As regards the panchnama, it was contended that the panchnamas were given to the concerned authorized person, and the assessee request for cross-examination was not conducted, as the statement relied upon were recorded under section 132(4) during the time of search from the employees of the assessee, and therefore it cannot be given. So the department was of the view that the statement was of your employee only, so it is not required to given to you. The revenue relied on the judgment of Delhi High Court in the case of MDLR Resort Private Limited. That was fortunately or unfortunately my case, and contended that the panchnama is a document which can be either preceding documentation, search, or without any seizure. It can be a document for a return of article or the removal, and it can also be a document evidencing the conclusion of the search, and therefore the assessee cannot be aggrieved on account of denial of the copies of the panchnama. Number 3, the proposed addition was not made on any oral evidences made by the third parties, but it was based on the material seized during the search. So this was the main contention of the revenue. The Honorable Madras High Court, if I may say, has given a very sharp and crisp decision discussing and refuting each and every argument of the revenue and considering all the arguments of the assessee, and the reasons also has been given why they are doing so. After considering the argument and cross arguments of the Honorable High Court has held as under. The assessee has sought the copies for the panchnamas in 63 places searched, but however, the department have admittedly not given all the panchnamas to the assessee, even though they have accepted that the assessee are entitled to the same in the counter affidavit. So, sir, they have one point, they have accepted that, okay, they are entitled, but we are not giving because the panchnamas are huge. Non-furnishing of the panchnama to the assessee is in violation of the principle of natural justice, as it disables them from having knowledge of the seized material and the alleged incriminating material relied upon by the respondent department. It's a very valid point, basically. Whatever be the volume of the material seized, the assessee also have demanded the same. The department is bound to have given all the copies when the department using the said materials for framing of the assessment order. Copies of the same should be given to the assessee. So in this case, the Honorable High Court has made it clear that when you are using something against me on the principle of natural justice, dehoards the size of the seized material, you have to give it to me. On the next issue of the refusal of cross-examination of the person whose statements were recorded during the time of search under section 132(4) of the Income Tax Act, the High Court observed that it is a trite law that the person against whom a statement is used should be given an opportunity to counter and contest the same. The court did not accept the contention of the revenue that since the statement recorded were of the assessee's persons who were employees of the assessee, and therefore the assessee cannot seek for cross-examination. So, sir, in this case, the Honorable High Court has categorically held that even if the statement was recorded of a person which is directly, indirectly connected to you, it may be an employee, but since they are using the statement against you, so the statement should be given to you, number one, and a specific cross-examination, if asked by you, should be given to you. The basic principle of jurisprudence governing the law of evidence can in no way be interfered by the Income Tax Act, and neither the authorities functioning under the Income Tax Act has any discretion in such matters. Now, this is very important, sir, which makes this case a bit unique according to me. When the entire assessment has been framed only on the basis of so-called electronic record, which are the copies of Excel sheets, Excel notebook, WhatsApp chats, etc. Non-compliance of section 65B of the Indian Evidence Act renders the document inadmissible in the eyes of law, as held by a judgment of Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Anwar PV case. And this, the relevant observation of this judgment of Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Anwar PV case has also been reproduced and relied upon by the Honorable Madras High Court in this case. In view of the violation of the principle of natural justice and also due to non-compliance of section 65 capital B of the Indian Evidence Act, the view of the court is that it is a fit case for setting aside the assessment order, basically. Then the High Court has also observed that the CIT appeal has not got the order of has not got the power of remand, so they are in the best suited position to remand the proceedings, basically. In this case, sir, according to me, I have culled out some important ratios. I will just read it. The provision of section 65B of the Indian Evidence Act is required to be compiled by the department if it desires to place reliance on the electronic evidences. So, sir, electronic evidences in the given situation gains prominence because it covers your hard disk, your mobile, your WhatsApp conversation, etc., etc. So now, in the given situation, when the department comes to your place, search your place, and they have all the electronic evidences, this case law set the motion in the right direction, if you ask me. If the provision of section 65B of the Indian Evidence Act are not complied, the assessment order framed in pursuance thereof shall be vitiated. Number 3, the copies of Panchnama should be provided to the assessee in pursuance to the search proceeding, dehoards the quantum of the search proceedings conducted in number of places when the assessee have asked for it. The principle of cross-examination of a person, if asked by the assessee, should be given to the assessee. The presence of the alternative remedy is not a bar in invoking the writ jurisdiction of the High Court, especially when the CIT appeal does not have the power of remand. And the last principle, according to me, sir, the basic principle of jurisprudence governing the law of evidence are applicable on the income tax authorities, basically. Now, sir, if I may just discuss a bit more, this case law is an authority, if you ask me, pertaining to the electronic evidence of Indian Evidence Act, which says that, you know, there are two sections, section 62 and 63. Section 62 states it's a primary evidence, 63 it states that secondary evidence. Primary evidence is some document or thing that is produced before the court in the original, and secondary evidence is certified copies of the original documents. So the contents of that has to be certified. If the income tax authorities wants to place reliance on the electronic evidences in view of this decision, in view of the ratio of this decision, they have to comply with the provision of section 65B of the Indian Evidence Act. Basically, this is the very crisp ratio of this judgment. Now, having said so, I will just also emphasize that there is a manual of the Income Tax Department by the name Digital Evidence Investigation Manual. If I may show the relevant point.
Can you share this this document also with us, sir?
I will share, sir, which precisely give the guidelines of complying to the provision of the electronic evidences, which has been laid down by the CBDT itself. So why I was just preparing for this case laws, I was just able to go through this manual. If I may read the relevant provision, which also says in a way that the provision of the Indian Evidence Act pertaining to electronic evidence should be complied with. If I may just read, sir, I am reading the relevant part of the manual. Allow me to read. As far as the Income Tax Act 1961 is concerned, it has been amended thrice by way of Finance Act 2001, Finance Act 2002, and Finance Act 2009 respectively. By way of first amendment, provision of subsection 12 capital A of section 2 was inserted to give a legal recognition to the books of account maintained on computer, and subsection 22 capital A to section 2 was inserted to provide definition of document which included electronic record as described under the Information Technology Act. So, sir, the relevant changes has been made in the Income Tax Act also, that is under section 2, subsection 2 capital A, which recognizes this electronic record. Under Information Technology Act 2000, an electronic record has been defined to include data, record or data generated, image or sound stored, received or sent in an electronic form, or microfilm or computer generated microfile. This definition of electronic record is wide enough to cover person in possession of computer, storage device, server, mobile, iPod, or any such device. So, sir, this is the manual itself. The above amendment has been specifically given recognition to the electronic record as admissible evidence at par with the document. Okay. Further, the power to impound copy of document during a survey under section 133A, and power to seize a document during a search and seizure operation has been automatically extended to electronic records as a result of the said amendment. So they say that we can now impound your electronic documents in view of this changes made in the Income Tax Act. So this is important. By way of second amendment, provision of section 132 within brackets Roman 2b were inserted, facilitating access to electronic devices, including computer containing documents, books of accounts in the form of electronic records, by making it obligatory for the persons under control of such device to afford the necessary facility to inspect such records. Now, sir, the manual itself categorically considered this Indian Evidence Act. I will just read. Under the Indian Evidence Act, there are several references to documents and records and entries in the books of account and their recognition as evidence. By way of the second schedule to the Information Technology Act amendments to the Indian Evidence Act have been brought in so as to incorporate reference to electronic records along with document giving recognition to the electronic record as evidence. After considering all these things in the manual, it has been stated in bold, sir. Further, special provision as to evidence relating to electronic records have been inserted in the Indian Evidence Act 1872 in the form of section 65A and 65B and after section 65. These provisions are very important. I am not saying, I am just reading the manual. These provisions are very important. Now they are writing in bold, sir. They govern the integrity of the electronic record as evidence, as well as the process for creating electronic records. Importantly, they impart faithful output of computer, the same evidentiary value as original without further proof or production of original. Accordingly, while handling any digital evidence, the procedure has to be in consonance of these provisions. So what have been said in the manual has been vindicated by the decisions of the decision of this Honorable Madras High Court in the case of vertebral minerals, sir, basically. Now again at page number 180, they say that they have to preserve the document and the provision of section 65B, etc. has to be followed in the manual. This, sir, according to me, is a unique case law which have a direct impact on the searches which are conducted and in pursuance to such which they are collecting the this electronic records, and perhaps they are not giving any kind of primary evidence or a certificate under section 65B. So this can be a valid argument. When to take the valid argument, either before in the appellate jurisdiction or in a writ jurisdiction, that will depend upon facts to fact. Otherwise, it is a very relevant observation, sir.
Sir, I have one issue into this part here, just to understand here. As mentioned that in this case, it was totally based on the secondary evidences here.
Yes.
So how the electronic evidence rule will change if it is a primary evidence or if it is a secondary evidence? Whether this judgment, whether the outcome of the judgment could have changed if the electronic evidence would have been the primary evidence?
Sir, primary evidence is evidence in which is a thing in which you place reliance on, basically. Okay. Now there are two kinds of evidence. primary evidence and a secondary evidence. Primary evidence is a thing which you have to produce before the authority and say that this is my mobile and this is the primary evidence. So you are placing the mobile as it is before the court. Now, due to any reason, if you are not able to place that evidence in the original form and content before the court, so in that case, you can give a statement. Suppose I can give a statement that, sir, I have seen this mobile. So that is a secondary evidence. Now, the provision for giving the this electronic evidence as a evidence under the Indian Evidence Act has been prescribed under section 65B. Basically, they say that if you are not able to give the primary evidence or the secondary evidence, then you have to give a certificate under section 65B4. 65B4 is a very interesting provision which establishes the authenticity of the particular electronic evidence. Primarily, the condition which is spelled out in section 65B is broadly as under. I will just read out. The computer output containing the information was produced by the computer during the period over which the computer was regularly in use by the person having lawful control over the computer. So, two things. The computer was regularly used and it was having a lawful possession on the computer. This is important. Information so derived was regularly fed in computer in the ordinary course of activities. So it is not like that, one fine day before just one day of, sir, somebody has come and inserted and has planted something in your computer. You are using computer now you are using now in a regular and ordinary course of business. Third condition, throughout the material period of the information in review, the computer was operating properly. Operating properly, again meaning thereby that there is no tampering or experimenting in your computer. Number 4, the electronic record is derived from such information fed into the computer in the ordinary course. So, a person who wishes to place reliance on this electronic evidence has to give evidence in these terms, which has been specifically prescribed in the Indian Evidence Act under section 65B4. Now, as I have also taken you to the severity manual, long back, this manual is, if I may see the year, it is of 2014. This judgment has came in 2021. These sections, the relevance of these sections have been accepted by the CBDT long back. Again, just to complete a holistic view of the discussion, I may submit that, there can be an argument that the technicalities and the strict rules of evidence, Indian Evidence Act, are not applicable under the Income Tax Act, basically. But that does not mean that if I am raising objections, so you are not able to, you can refute it. I mean to say, you can refute it. However, there is no direct procedure, if I may say, there is no direct procedure which is prescribed under the Income Tax Act for the admissibility and the preservation of the electronic evidence, but to the manual which I have found and which I have read, basically. So this discussion will have a long-term repercussions, and this argument of section 65B can be raised in number of cases before honorable member, sir.
I think there is one judgment of 3 judges of Honorable Supreme Court in September 2020, I think, by Fali Nariman.
Yes, sir. That is the Arjun Pandit Rao quote करते हैं, sir.
Arjun Pandit Rao.
Yes,
I think that discussment they have discussed the validity of certificate, the 65B. I think some of the time actually you should take up those judgments, because of course, as the learned speaker said, that this is a very important judgment. They have referred to this section 65B, though no ratio has been laid down here, except for there was a gross violation of natural justice at all level. I think this is one of the peculiar case of high-handedness by the revenue. So, but someday or the other, even if you can pick up, because this would be very relevant nowadays for the tax professionals and even for the court. Because as they say, nowadays, even if we go various agencies, investigation agencies relying heavily upon the WhatsApp chats, their other things. So, and plus now most of the evidences are collected from the hard disk, from the data, from the pen drives.
Yes.
So this has assumed a very great significance, especially in the case of survey, in the case of search, or any other thing. Maybe
Yes.
somebody supplies a pen drive belonging to someone. So I think those judgments, summarizing one topic, any day you can pick up and call some good speaker. So perhaps it would be very enlightening for all the tax professionals, because this is something which generally we don't go into much detail of, until unless we come across certain issues or certain case. So that's my suggestion. I think the chairman and the learned members can decide when.
No, sir,
And
you
one
are
of the topics you can keep someday, as he pointed out, this manual was hardly aware of that. This manual itself shows that you have to comply with section 65B.
sir, they
And
are saying,
65B says
sir,
that.
sir, in the manual when I was preparing for this judgment, in the manual, sir, they have said in bold, accordingly, while handling any digital evidences, the procedure has to be in consonance of these provisions.
And
Consonance.
rarely, I think most of them do. Department rarely complies with those procedures.
That is why I'm saying that it can be a very valid argument before your honor also, basically, that they have not complied the provision of section 65B, despite their own manual saying so.
One thing I would share with everything, there are at times where we come across judgments where, we have not department relying upon certain statement recording during search, or maybe recorded by someone else at some point of time, and there's no cross-examination given, where there has been mixed view. The fundamental difference I wanted to tell, that what happens if that statement per se becomes incriminating for making the sole basis for making the addition, then that statement cannot be admitted till you are given authority to cross-examine.
Very well, very well.
But there could be a situation where there are other leading primary evidences, and statement is another corroborative. So additions are based on those primary evidence, and this is only supportive. Then in those cases, perhaps cross-examination courts may agree, may not agree. So there comes a situation and points where we have seen that lawyers or tax practitioners, that thing has to be kept in the mind, whether this statement per se itself is the entire basis and substratum of the assessment or the addition, or it is just a mere subsequent of other documentary and other evidences on inquiry found during the course of search, survey, or investigation, inquiry, whatever.
Yes, yes.
So perhaps now this is some of the thing where you find certain decisions where they have agreed, they have not agreed. So,
Sir, on the issue of, sir, cross-examination and whether incriminating or not, that is now more or less a settled proposition. You will agree. But sir, this judgment, if you ask me, in my humble submission, is an authority on 65B, obviously, because this is a direct judgment on that, sir.
They have relied on this Supreme Court judgment on Anwar's case.
Yes,
It was the first judgment which had come, I think in 2014 or 13, I don't know. So that was the first judgment came where they have explained the section 65B.
Yes,
but
sir.
I think the other judgment, that Falin Nariman's judgment in September 2020, which he just pointed out the citation, that is an authority which sometime you must discuss with all of them.
Yes, yes, sir.
So I have one point, actually, the one aspect of this which you touched upon during your discussion. which was whether we can go for the direct writ without exhausting the available appellate channels which are there. So as you rightly mentioned, the judgment says that it is not necessary to do that. So this is actually very, there is lack of clarity, especially in chartered accountants.
I think Mr. Goyal, what happened that since it is a writ jurisdiction, extraordinary jurisdiction, 99% it is just discretion of the court. Earlier, what used to happen, 148 being the jurisdictional issues, many of the high courts used to entertain that. So since they were flooded with that, then this concept of Supreme Court brought that, you file your submission, ask for the reasons, you dispose of the objections, and then you can come up. And then when the various SSCs have gone before the Honorable High Court on the writ, they have entertained it. Some of them, since they have already passed, you can go before and exhaust the appellate channels. So here in this case, already assessment was passed. In this case, perhaps.
Yes, sir. Assessment order was passed, sir.
Assessment order was passed. So they went directly before, because prima facie there was a writ large cross violation and high-handedness. So maybe just that is the reason why now before the High Court, Mr. Goyal, no lawyer can tell us whether this will happen or not happen. Because writ there are certain parameters, yes, but these are the circumstances where courts have to come down under writ jurisdiction and come down to heavily. If you read the entire facts and the contention raised, you can imagine the kind of gross violation from you're not providing panchnama, you're not providing statement, you are not providing seized material documents, you are not, every step by step you're not providing. I think SSC kept on asking, you just simply use those evidences and make the assessment. So perhaps otherwise most of the courts will say you go to the appellate court, you have a various authority, you file your additional evidences there, you ask for it, he'll ask for the remand report. So that is something which Mr. Goyal, I think nobody can answer it.
Right, sir. Thank you.
You will agree, आपने भी इतने लंबे career में देखा होगा, you must have advised your client, we can go or not go. There is always a, clarity is not there.
Yes.
Sir, I would like to, sir, draw your attention on the para number 25 of this judgment, sir. In this para number 25, there was an argument by the SSC that since the CIT appeal does not have the power to remand, and therefore they have not approached to the CIT alternative appeal here, and therefore this writ is maintainable. And the court has accepted this part, sir, saying that yes, you have the, just I'm trying to read, sir. However, however, it remains to the fact that after the amendment of 251(1)(a) of the Income Tax Act from 1st June 2000, the Commissioner of CIT Appeal does not have the power to remand. Therefore, on the fact and circumstances of the case, since the petitioner have made a clear case of the violence of the principle of natural justice and the statute, the court feels that it is a fit case for the interfering with the impugned order. So one of the view that has also been taken that since that he does not have the power to remand, that okay, come here.
But Mr. Sinha, what happened that though it is a single judge and that to be in a writ petition, not under section 260 where they're answering a substantial question of law, but then it assumes little different significance. It all depends on the discretion. The case said you can file your additional notices, they can call opportunity to give remand report. How many cases I think CITP calls for the remand report where AO has not given you opportunity to file an evidence there. So there could be, because objectivity somewhere gets loses, because there are various assessment, very high-handedness and lack of opportunity they have passed in assessment. So in every case, we cannot just go before the High Court citing this case, look, CITP does not have a power to remand, so you entertain my writ and you just send me back to the AO or you just quash the violation of principles of natural justice. That is perhaps a very grey area. I will not say it will be an authority for other than to follow. Specifically, yes, in the case of 260A, substantial question of formulated by the High Court and something, writ jurisdiction is something, that to be by single judge. It can, though it is bad. It's a very good reference point for us, good precedence for us. but we cannot just invoke this judgment to say, ki, sir, now, writ should be entertained.
No, sir. Sir, it can be a very valid and humble argument before your honor. That was the thing.
हमारे पास तो रिट की पावर नहीं है, हम तो यही कर सकते हैं, भैया ईओ के पास भेजते हैं, हमारे सामने समझा दीजिए. We are a very limited thing, Tribunal is a toothless tiger, that's all. So for otherwise, other issues, yes, we can do that.
Very well, sir. Sir, your point has been noted.
So it is all, Ruchesh sir, next issue is on the, sir, EY Global. It is basically, next case is on the EY Global here. And it is basically on the royalty issue, which the Supreme Court has settled, almost settled cases here.
I
But in
think
that,
there was some peculiar fact, otherwise, judgment per se is now, law has been well settled. They have applied the law that in case of, if there is a violation of article section 14 of Copyright Act, if all those are applicable or not. So yes, it is relevant because there was a peculiar fact in this case, so they held it to be applicable.
yes,
We can take it.
yes, I can take it, sir. Just hold on, sir. I would like to share my PPT, sir. Is it visible, sir?
Yes, it is.
It says that the fact of that case is that EY Global Services, that is again coming from the AR, very much important. EY Global Services, that is the petitioner in case, is the LLC, that is the limited liability company of UK, of EY and of the EY network, and engaged in the providing the technology and other support services to the member of the EY itself here. It has entered into contract with the EY member firm for providing support services and deliverable for which it has entered into contract with a third party for the procurement of software. So it used to procure the software from the third party and make a common platform, common service platform. And on this service platform, the EY group member used to utilize that service platforms. And for that purpose, they used to make the payment here. EY Global Services India, that is the Indian company, has entered into the contract with the petitioner for the right to benefit from the deliverables or the services. So they have this type of agreement was there, right to benefit from the deliverables and services. A specific services which was as per the MOU was there, which was that common standards and policies. They will be preparing the common standard and policy which will be used by everyone. IT services, a common platform, knowledge-based, they will use to be a hub of the knowledges. Global industry centers, global procurement services, global shared services, and other services. These were the, as per the MOU, these were the services which they were offering to the member of the EY here. The matter before the AR was that when they filed the application before the AR, whether the amount that there was as per the agreement between the UK entity and the Indian entity, which was there, whether the amount received or receivable on account of services will be FTS. First question was asked whether these services which they will be offering through the standard platform, whether that will be a FTS. AR was fairly coming into the view, fairly was coming into the view that this is not an FTS. The second question was that whether the amount received as a reimbursement of the cost of giving the right to benefit and the deliverables and the services will constitute income in the hands of the UK entity. The UK entity raised the question that the amount that they are getting paid from the Indian entity is a reimbursement of the expenses for the services that they are using here. So whether that will be a reimbursement, so AR comes to say that no, it is not a reimbursement of the expenses. It is a service income of the EY. Third part, which is very much critical, that is that whether the payment received or receivable for the right to benefit and the deliverable services will amount to royalty. Third question was asked. In this case, the AR has view that consideration for the right to benefit from the computer software is royalty. It says that computer software was a right to benefit from the computer software was a royalty, whereas the consideration for right to benefit from the services is not a royalty or also not an FTS also. And it was also that what will be the, since they don't have the P in India, so what will be the TDS rate? So the issue was there whether the consideration for the right to benefit from the computer software is a royalty or not. And on this limited question, it was challenged before the High Court here. So the High Court, before the High Court, it was a challenge before the High Court on the limited issue of the royalty. Arguments of the petitioner in the case was that the services are for the non-exclusive and non-assignable use of the deliverables or the services. The consideration is for the services through the standard facility for which the access is granted to the member firm. So they were saying that we have created a standard facility from the software that they have procured, and based on this software, we are providing the access to the standard facility. Third point was that there is no transfer of the copyright in favor of the members and therefore should not be royalty. And they applied the engine analysis case here, saying that since there was no transfer of the copyright in favor of the member, therefore it should not be treated as a royalty. This was the mainly argument of the revenue, argument of the SSC. Revenue argument was something contrary here. Revenue was saying that no, the Supreme Court judgment does not apply to you. It was saying that only the 4 category of arrangement that is there, that is covered into that judgment here, and your case is not covered into these 4 category. So therefore, your case cannot be covered under this judgment here. Second point was that the consideration are for the services of a standard facility, which it has created through the procurement of licensed software, and therefore commercial exploitation of the standard facility is there. Since it is a commercial exploitation of the facility, so it should be covered, and this commercial exploitation is through the software, so it should be covered under royalty. The third argument was that the software is a computer program and is a literary work, and payment for the use of right to use such copyright will amount to royalty. Here the revenue was not in sync with the above judgment here, because in this case, the fact of the case was the Indian company was using the right to use the software. They were not using any copyright here. So, but here the revenue was on the view that it is a right to use the copyright and therefore it will amount to royalty. And it was there, it will cover under the explanation 5 of the 916. It is wrongly typed here. It will cover under the explanation 5 of the 916 here. However, in the case of the AR was mainly relying upon the certain case law, mainly the Citrix case here, which was overruled by which has been declared by the Supreme Court in the engine analysis as not a good case law. Based on this High Court observation was like this one. The code transaction is to utilize the end user to have the access and use the licensed software, and on this license has not exclusive right, or therefore no copyright has been parted away with, and therefore cannot be royalty. The court was of the view that the agreement was for the right to use the common facility or the standard facility. Therefore, it was not a use the licensed software, copyright, and therefore it should not be treated as a royalty. The consideration for the use of software cannot be royalty. The contract of UK entity with the intended entity has to be considered differently than the contract of the UK entity with the third party vendor through which they have procured the software and they were paying the license fees. The third point was that since the AR has relied mainly upon the Citrix case in order to come to the conclusion that this transactions is a royalty under the Income Tax Act, and since in the Supreme Court in the engineering analysis case has held that the Citrix case is not a good case law, and Supreme Court has uh, set aside the lot of AR judgment here. Therefore, saying this, the court has held, since the Supreme Court has already set aside the Citrus case, which was a bad law. Therefore, based on this case, the order of the AR is also not a good law here. Fourth issue was there, whether the only 4 type of the agreement which was covered under the engineering analysis case can be viewed from the Supreme Court judgment. The answer was that although it has started from the fact of the 4 type of agreement, but the Supreme Court has given or propagated a general application here or general law based on the fact of the case, and therefore the court was of the view that it is a covered case with the engineering analysis, and therefore it has allowed the writ of the petitioner here. So this was a very short case here. Mainly was there were a lot of issues that was arising after this Supreme Court judgment here, whether this Supreme Court judgment is covered with the 4 type of agreement, or we have to see something new into this part here. So the court is primarily of the view that even though it on the fact of the case was it was started with the 4 type, but Supreme Court has pronounced a very legal proposition here, and this legal proposition has to be applied. And if the fact of the case is covered into this legal proposition, then the benefit of the Supreme Court decision should be given to this part here. So it is a very small case here. Any view into this part, sir?
I think it is all clear, because even what was the controversy earlier, which we all know, because DTAA royalty was not defined, so they used to see what do you mean by the copyright. Royalty was always there in the income, defined in the income tax. Copyright was not defined, so they had always taken the definition of copyright as provided in the Indian Copyright Act. So what is the copyright was defined under section 14, then section 30, 50, when and what there could be infringement or otherwise use of a copyright. So that was interpreted by the courts, which the Supreme Court, there were various 4 kind of controversies before them, were arising of different kind of agreements. So they have analyzed that, but they have laid on the fundamental principles and which there could be a copyright or not. So practically, this judgment of Supreme Court now practically covers everything.
Yes, sir, it practically covers, sir.
Unless we change, bring some changes in the domestic law, that is under the Income Tax Act. Because what we have said, we have defined royalty to the maximum possible way. But the copyright as such has not been defined under the Income Tax Act. Because they could not have done, because there is a separate altogether overriding act of Copyright Act.
Prakash, I would like to pick up the point of reimbursement in this.
Okay.
So my point is that this is due to the nature of the contract here, which you have shown in the bullets. It covered these services as such, you know. So I was just wondering, had these not been the services, these have been the pooling of resources and sharing the cost thereon. Had the contract been in that manner, so would there be a pressure from the revenue side that this should be compensated for the markup also?
Yes, sir. If you will say that in the given fact, it was a services which was the UK LLC was providing to the group member or group entity here. But yes, if we say that no, it was a pure cost to cost reimbursement here. It was a pure cost to cost reimbursement here. Then my view that then there can be some TP issues would have come here, and where
there must be a TP analysis because it is an international transaction between the two. There must have been TP analysis where they must have offered it in some way or the other as a markup or something or the other.
No, what Goel Sahab is asking, sir, that it is a services. Now we are asking for the services fee of the services. But Goel Sahab asking that if it would a club of all the group member has tried to make a consolidated platform and everyone is paying for the purpose of it is a shared services, whether this TP could have applied and any markup which was required for this purpose or not. Am I right, sir?
So I mean to say, sir, actually there is a concept like shared service centers. So where the idea is not to earn income, the idea is that instead of everybody parallelly procuring those services, instead of that procuring the services at one place and sharing the cost. Now only point which comes to my mind is in this case that such costs are not directly linkable to any entity. So for example, I buy over an invoice which is of say X amount. So now X amount is not defined that there are 12 locations and 1/12 of that each has to go, or somewhere it has to go 1/12, somewhere has to go to 2/5 or whatever. So it is the pool which I have bought for the resources, and now I work out on some allocation key basis. That is the point. So there it is a reimbursement, or there is still need for maybe a low value addition. Is there need for that? Sir, you're on mute, sir.
There are controversies in such matters where they classified as intra-group services. They classify this into IGS services where TP analysis is being done by the TP, because SSC don't do separate TP benchmarking analysis of these services, because for them it is a common pool of services which is available for any one entity is doing it on a cost sharing basis.
Yeah.
So they allocate the cost on certain usages and they do that. So SSC generally don't do that. They said since we would have done from the other third party, would have done that. So cost benefit analysis sometimes is taken, sometimes not. TPOs are generally said that no benefit has been cost, so they put it as a nil or something or the other. So that is a controversy which has always come down here. What they have said that reimbursement itself was in FTS. What they did in this particular case, they said that since it is a reimbursement, it is a rendering of for technical services. So first part they treated as an FTS. Which AR also said that no, not that. So revenue generally, what happens in reimbursement cases, they always take a view of that it is a FTS, case of an FTS.
I think Saurabh ji wants to say something on that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. What I wanted to ask was, did they consider it as something akin to a cost contribution agreement,
Yes,
where
exactly.
everybody is contributing to the cost?
Hmm.
And if that is a cost contribution agreement, then first of all, whether there was the question of TP would be of relevance. And then, of course, characterization wise, they have established that it's not royalty. So perhaps the question of TDS was not that relevant. So what was the discussion on that? If Prakash ji could throw some light on.
Yes, sir. It was discussion on the issue of the reimbursement. It was a discussion on the issue of the reimbursement. And by way of the AR order, I can find out that the AR was of the view that it is a services by the UK company to all the group company. It is not merely a reimbursement part here. It is not merely a reimbursement. It is they are preparing a common platform. They are preparing a common services platform which are being used by all the group member entity here. So therefore, it cannot be considered as a cost to cost reimbursement. They are providing the services because they are taking the software from the third vendors, and they are making the platform. They are using this platform, and they were allowing the group member entity to join this. And for this purpose, the court was of the view that it is not a reimbursement.
But the aggregator or the coordinator who was getting the payment from all service recipients, he actually was not providing any service. He was just coordinating for all. That's what seems to be.
If you see the MOU which was there, I have placed the nutshell of the MOU in the PPT. In the MOU, they have said that there are 5 types of services which they are providing. Which I have mentioned that in my presentation here. Can I go? I mentioned that they have agreed, and in fact, it was agreed by that they are providing the services, 5 type of services. It was not
Okay.
it was not merely a contribution here.
Yes,
Okay.
sir, actually, that is in this particular case, it was very clear because there is a contract and which is clearly, mentioning that it is for services.
Okay.
I was just drawing a parallel and trying to understand that. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Controversy in this matter always comes before us, whether in a peculiar case 153C should have been taken or 148.
Yes,
Because
sir.
if some information found in the case one person searched, so it should be 153C or 148, because this is the controversy which many people come across. I think
Peculiar thing of this judgment, if you will agree, sir, the Honorable High Court of Gujarat has, in my view, sir, has morely gone on the basic of logistic issues, convenience, rather than the law itself, basically.
I agree, this is not the logic or perhaps a reasoning to say so. Reasoning
Yes.
should have been different. They have gone by this impracticality of the things.
Yes, sir. So they are saying that, in this case, the question of logistic or practical application of provision cannot be lost sight of, basically. So they say that there are 500 assessees. So, the AO should have been involved 147 rather than 153C, basically.
That is, I think, that reasoning conclusion was correct, but reasoning, logical, and other things was absolutely, perhaps, to all due respect to the judgment.
Very well.
We cannot comment upon that.
Very well,
But
sir.
perhaps it would have been explained in a better way. So anyway, the conclusion was right. Isliye we can say that we may not follow the reasons. But I think this issue is very important. Some appropriate time people must address to this issue.
Very well, sir.
On certain judgments, because this is a controversy which often comes up. In peculiar cases, 153C should have been taken or 148, because there is a conflicting judgments also. So perhaps some appropriate time we can take up this issue.
And sir, in this case also, sir, the assessee has choose to file a writ petition directly after passing of the assessment order, rather than going against the order of their objections, disposal of their objections, basically.
Sir, last thing I would like to state, one question. One question has come through the Anish Thakkar, sir. He is a senior member of the CTC. He has just mentioned on the trust issue. He says that we should not worry too much about the use of the term trust here, since the trust is revocable and income should always be taxed under Section 63 in the hands of the settler, who has the power to revoke the trust. I think we have already discussed this part here.
Yes. That is the correct proposition of law.
Yeah.
I was saying in another way. I was saying in a different way altogether. Otherwise, law is absolutely correct.
Yes.
It is, because it has to be under Section 60 to 63.